I think that makes a ton of sense. Although, just slight counterpoint, I would say, is I think that the number that you've got in reserves should be independent of your rent
Mm.
amount. Because if someone owns a house, single family home that rents for $800 a month, if I've got 4 months rent sitting in my bank account, that's $3,200, and I get hit with this turn because it's a similar sized property, I could be up a creek kind of a thing. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of The Remote Investor. I'm Michael Album, and joining me today is my co-host,
Tom Schneider.
And today we're going to be talking to Tom about what it's like to do a turn, since you're in the middle of one, right?
That's right. That is right.
And for anybody who's new to real estate investing or who might not know what that is, can you just give us a quick rundown of like what is a turn and why are we dedicating a whole show to this? Why is it important enough?
Yeah, so I'd say a turn is probably one of the most active or kind of busy decision-making time after you've done the acquisition. So to kind of give specific kind of bookends of this, it's you have a resident whose lease is ending and they've decided to give notice all the way to the point at which the home is occupied again. So lots of important kind of decisions to make with me and my property manager, and excited to talk about it today.
Awesome. Or if you're like in Pierre's case, where your tenant doesn't give notice and just pieces out and you're left with an empty unit, you might have to do a turn then too.
Yeah, I guess not all turns are created equally.
Right.
Evictions, right. There's, kind leaves. Yeah.
All right, cool. So let's jump into this and dissect it a little bit. So first question, Tom, did you decide to do this turn, or did the tenant kind of make that decision, quote unquote, for you by leaving the unit in disrepair?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they left the unit in disrepair. So I have a property management company that I use in Georgia. I'm over in California, and they're on it. So their process is, as we approach the end of a lease, they talk to. I'm already getting away from the question you asked. I'm not exactly sure what it was.
I love your non-answer.
I know. So it was the resident decided to leave. So
Okay.
I got a little winded there. But at a high level, we start the release process a couple months before the end. They decided, they wanted to move, whatever. We presented them an offer, and they decided to leave. So I think I got back on the rails of your actual question you were asking.
You're just doing a pitch for your property management partner for the episode.
I guess I am. I don't know. Yeah.
All right. So your tenant left.
Yep.
The property manager talked to them as the lease approached its end, found out they were going to be leaving, and then they gave you some heads up, or what did that look like? That, hey, the tenant is leaving. We might have to do some work, or how did you know that you were going to have to do like a quote unquote turn as opposed to just getting a new tenant in the door?
Yeah, so this is communication from my property manager, and that, we've presented, the updated rent. They, we're going to leave, nothing really to be done there. The first thing that they ask is like, do you want to lease it again, or do you want to like sell it? They're probably excited about any and all situations, so long as they keep the business, perhaps make money. But I think I answered your question.
All right. I think that totally answers it.
Yep.
And so I'm curious, Tom, like with you and your property manager having this conversation, there's always the balancing act of occupancy and vacancy versus rent growth.
Yep.
And so did you try to get a rental increase for this at the end of this lease? And do you think that could, and if so, do you think that could have contributed to your tenant deciding to leave?
Excellent question, Michael. I try to, usually when my property manager comes to me at the end of the lease, they'll say, the rent's a little bit under, they're a good resident. Oh, let's, maybe increase it a little bit or not. And more often than not, my response is, hey, what do you think is the right course of action, and why? And, a good property management will kind of a thoughtful response to that. So I believe for this particular case that's happening right now, they did thought it was, a $25 or a $50 a month increase, was the right like market length. But I would have been very willing, let them know like, hey, if there's something we could do to save it, just because turns typically are just, in vacancy, and that kind of cost is just like a killer to the underline. So I believe their recommendation was going up a little higher, but like leaving it open if there was any kind of pushback around kind of keeping it, keeping it the same. But I mean, as a really salient point, like in going into a turn is like, hey, is there a way to avoid it? And me as an investor, like, and especially having like a good tenant, like great, if they're good tenants, like we don't necessarily need to change it. While like
Yeah.
some rent growth is always like helpful down the line, vacancy is like much worse. So long-winded story is I think they were pushing for a little bit of rent growth, but even with the opportunity to keep it the same, they were moving anyways.
Yeah. And that's exactly kind of what that tells me was in the tenant's mind. Like $25 a month is whatever, $250 a year, if my math is right, in terms of additional rent that they're paying. Like to go rent a U-Haul is like $200, let alone the hassle of moving. So I think you hit the nail on the head. When you can keep things in place with a good tenant, it's a win-win for everybody. And so even if you aren't getting that rent growth as the owner, you're not having to deal with vacancy. You're not having to deal with a release fee from your property manager. You're not having to deal with a turn cost. It can be a slam dunk, even if you're not getting that rent growth. So I just encourage anybody who's kind of in a similar situation to run the numbers and not blindly run towards these rental increases, thinking that they're doing so much better now. Of course, now the obvious downside to that is if you allow the tenant to stay at the same rent for multiple years at a time, and now there's a significant delta between market rent and your current rent, that can get sticky at times, especially because our expenses do tend to increase on the property over time. All right, so shifting gears here, how did you figure out, and what did that process look like in terms of what the scope of this turn was going to be? Did that come from you? Was that from your property manager? Was that from somebody else? Well, give us some insights there.
This is from the property manager, and they manage a little over a handful of properties for me. So a good,
how big of hands we talking? Big hands, little hands?
uh, medium sized hands.
All
so
right. Perfect.
Been through like this process with them before. So the way that works with these guys is they will create a scope internally, and
Okay.
document it, have an inspection, and then they will go out and get multiple bids against that scope.
Okay.
And
So they're
that's
not
kind of
doing it with in-house staff.
not doing it within in-house. I think if the scope was really limited, like it was pretty much just mow and blow and whatever, clean the carpets. But this one is a little bit more going on. I think there's some paint issues that gotta get into. So I think if the scope is very small, they'll like take it. But for this particular case, they have some external folks jumping in, submitting bids.
Okay. All right. Man, I hope no one takes that rhyme out of context. They just snip at the end of mow and blow. And I'm like, man, that is a funny rhyme. I never heard that one before.
Oh, it's a good one. Landscaping.
That's a real good one.
Yep.
So, okay. So they develop this scope. They run it by you. They go get quotes for you. And then they just present them to you. And then you get to decide what makes the most sense.
Yep. Actually have, very timely. I have that email in my inbox right now where they have presented the two bids against the scope. And, something that like never ceases to surprise me is like the differences in costs, like how kind of like dramatic they could be, between the two.
Totally.
And this isn't like an extreme case, but like a little bit, it kind of is a big swing.
Give us the rundown of the scope, and then I want to guess what the two bids are.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Open it up right now. I just typed the name of the property manager, and it has like the whole email like history. It's like, renewal suggestion, tenant's notice to vacate, utility connection. Okay. Turnkey estimates received. All right. Drywall, repair holes from nails and stuff like that.
Okay.
Paint. They recommended a full house, interior and exterior. There's drywall patches, includes the walls, trim, and doors. Clean. Okay. They have something called the rent ready package, like door stoppers, light bulbs, smoke detector batteries, HVAC filters, landscaping, flooring. It says routine flooring clean. Why wouldn't that be just part of regular clean? Window blinds.
Replace or clean?
It looks like there's not, and they're adding. So this is net
Okay.
new window blinds.
Okay.
Weather stripping door. Power for the microwave is missing. Ooh, I don't know what that means.
What?
It says the overhead microwave does not have power cord. Install a new card to replace the missing cord.
Ooh.
There's a few. This is
All
like
right.
I'm gonna speed this up a little bit. There is a little bit of water intrusion from the garage from the back deck. So replace some water threshold water entry. Pressure washing. That's always fun videos. You guys watch pressure washing videos? So far, this is seeming pretty vanilla. I mean, except the full paint. Full paint. See, let's see. We got fire extinguisher.
Anything else major, or is the rest just
caulking,
kind of miscellaneous odds and ends?
closet rack. They like list the same thing twice. This is something that I'm going to go back. I usually don't go through this much of a, but I might save myself $250 by like going in this a little bit deeper.
Yes.
Gutter cleaning.
Oh, that's a mow and blow type of job.
Yeah.
All right, so that's it.
That's it.
All right, I'm going 8,500.
I'm feeling a little bit better. I could have imagined this being lower. So the bid that I'm looking at right now is 6,885.
Okay.
And this particular bid is the lower of the two that I received. And they're actually like kind of tight on each other. The other one was 7,100. So here's the where I'm like kind of like, I think I know what the right thing to do is. Well, just as a matter of fund flow. So they manage a few properties. So they have like, they'll take rent in, and then send it to me at the end of the month. And I kind of want to just tell them like, hey, don't send me money this month. Just like use that towards this versus like sending them. I mean, I guess it's like indifferent, whatever. But oftentimes on these turns, they'll request to like send money in, but just from like a cash flow perspective, like I don't want them just to
sending money out of your bank account feels worse than just not receiving it to begin with.
Totally.
All right. Well, that's helpful. And that's a good exercise too, just for everybody listening to get a kind of understanding of what could be involved in a turn. Like someone's moving out of the house and you got to paint the whole house. That's a very different experience than someone moves out of the house and now you've got to redo a bathroom or put in new flooring or simply just clean the unit and get somebody else in. So this is kind of a middle of the road one. That's good to talk about.
Yeah.
So is there anything else above and beyond the scope that you're thinking about doing, like potential upgrades to either make the property more tenant proof, more resilient, or potential upgrades that would get higher rents?
Typically not. Like I would defer to the property manager. I don't see this property very often, so it's fun looking at like the video of the inspection just to kind of check in on everything that's there. And I see some potential spots to upgrade, the granite counterplace and, whatever. But I think I don't want to incur any more time on the rehab. And I want to get it like occupied. I'm less inclined of like adding some additional scope, to do that. And unless the property manager like explicitly mentioned something, as such. And, perhaps it's something I can shoot to them to ask if they have any recommendations around that. But I might be like pushing them to like say yes, if that's a way. I don't know. I feel like I wouldn't want them to try to think of something to do more, when it's not necessary. But long-winded, totally. I'm not. Yeah, I'm not planning on it. Yeah.
Well, Tom, as you're mentioning that, just a couple of things come to mind. One is the property manager might not be thinking about the increased revenue like you as an investor might be. So I love just reaching out and asking, hey, are there any upgrades that you'd recommend that you think would command a higher rent? And just leave it kind of open-ended and see what they say. Because a lot of times it can be really little stuff. It's funny. It's like two sides to a coin, right? One is we as people, as individuals, have biases and have wants and needs and desires. And so we might think, oh, I would never rent an apartment that didn't have X, or I would never rent a house that didn't have X. So therefore, I've got to go do X in all my rentals. And the reality is real estate investing is so hyper market specific that might not do anything for that particular market. So like if you're someone that loves marble countertops and you want to go put marble countertops in this particular property west of Atlanta, that might not be a big deal there. Like people might just not care. And now you've gotten to spend this money for no reason. On the flip side of that, though, there are so many things that are just a lot of property managers are very focused on getting the job done and can be a little bit single track minded. And so if there's carpet down, they're just going to go figure out how to replace the carpet or clean the carpet if it needs attention, as opposed to thinking, well, hey, if you replace it with LVP, it might cost more upfront, but you're never going to have to touch the stuff again. You're not going to have to clean the LVP like you would a carpet. So there are things that we want to just be mindful of as investors, some questions to be asking. Thoughts, responses, feedback.
I like it. I'm processing all this in my mind, and actually have the email to respond to the property manager, and I'm gonna put in a little questions there about recommendations. I like it.
Nice. The other big one that I love that I think is easy is so like replacing carpet with LVP is a great one. My other favorite is replacing appliances with stainless steel.
Mm.
If the appliance has to be replaced, don't go swapping out a perfectly good appliance for a stainless steel one. But if you're doing it anyhow, you can start to slowly transition them to stainless steel. That can be a nice perk as well, and typically doesn't cost much more if you're buying a new appliance anyhow. So just something to think about that I enjoy doing. All right, Tom. So you've got this big scope or medium-sized scope. I'm curious, is the property manager charging you for this service to kind of manage this process, or are you managing the process? What does this look like as a remote investor?
They're managing the like payment, and I think they have a little bit of an upcharge on this process. I've worked with one property manager that I don't work with anymore, who was like really like nickel and diming every activity and like every day.
Yep.
Like it's just like perverse incentives. But for this particular property manager, they have like a little bit of an upcharge on the bills. They send me the invoices like direct from the vendors that they use. So like, a lot of transparency. And they'll even add, I recommend going with this one, XYZ. We've used them before. So I built up enough trust with this particular vendor that, 99% of the time say, great, let's go with what you recommend, and then I'll,
Yep.
add in a little bit of special questions that we, went through on like other things within the market that could be help with occupancy and potentially rent.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. One other thing I just thought of is I know we were talking before about having your property manager pay those invoices from the rent that they collected as opposed to sending you the invoices. And if the vendor is able to collect payment via credit card and there's no like upcharge on it, I've seen that before. That can be great too. So that way you get credit card points or cash back, and maybe you get a 2% discount on the whole job, which for a $6,800 job or $7,000 job is not going to be life changing. But if you
Something.
5x that,
Yeah.
and it's something like it's free money at that point. So may as well try to take advantage of it again if they can do that.
I like it.
My last question for you, Tom, is how do you know whether to replace or repair something when it comes to a turn? Why don't you reach out to your property manager on some of this stuff and go, yeah, you know what? I don't think we need to paint the whole house. Maybe we can get by with painting these rooms.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very fair question. I mean, I'd say like on the spectrum, I'm probably less proactive in drilling into the specific like line items where they make those suggestions of repair and replace. So, kind of where I am in my investing, I don't know how I would frame it. My investing sort of like management style is, I have enough kind of like built up trust with this particular property manager. And when they provide a suggestion, they typically, show their homework on like what they would recommend. I would be fine kind of drilling into them, but for the most part, it's a path of I'll go a path of least resistance of like, okay, let's move forward. Let's get, I trust you as a local property manager. Okay, repair. Okay, replace.
That makes total sense. And I function the exact same way. How long are you able to say, did it take you to get to this point? So if somebody's listening, has a new property manager or is just getting started with their real estate investing, I mean, like you said, it takes time to develop that trust. How should they be thinking about that?
It takes time to develop that trust. I think a property manager that like does their homework, in that if they have a recommendation, maybe I could like in first developing that relationship with them, kind of noodle in a little bit deeper on stuff versus being a little bit more passive. And I don't say like, grill them on everything, but where there are some like items where there could be like meaningful differences in costs or time, like, ask them, say, hey, I was curious, you said repair the paint or whatever, like replace the garage door opener or whatever. What are our different options? Like, do you have similar situations with other customers? Like, how have you gone about it? What's the downside of doing this versus X? Just having open a dialogue.
I dig it. And I love that point you made about them doing their homework. If they come to you with the solution, like the answer to the question, as well as all of the background and supporting evidence, then, right? As opposed to saying, okay, well, how did you come to this conclusion? Walk me through this a little bit more. And that's kind of what we always harken back to is communication when it comes to property managers is so crucial.
Yeah.
So that's great. I think it makes a lot of sense.
And I think if you were like a really, I don't know what the right word is. I don't know if type A is the right type, but like wanted to grind them on every single item. Like maybe like real estate investing like can be really stressful. So
Yeah.
giving like the benefit of the doubt, like I saw this, there's like, there's a line for pressure washing in one place and there's another in another spot. And it's like, why is there two lines for pressure washing? I think you can get really like sucked in and like frustrated on like what you're looking at, but I think if you have like a good kind of guidelines on where those like turn costs like come in at, and like this is a good kind of middle of the road, not like a super duper cheap one, but it's not one where I'm gonna like throw like a major stink, on seeing some of this stuff. But
all right, Tom, I gotta ask a question that I think might be burning in all of our listeners' minds. What kind of rent are you getting on this house? Because you're going to pay about $7,000 at the end of the day, more or less, in a single turn. So what kind of rents are you collecting on this property?
Yes. So market rent, their suggestion is 1,550. So 1,550 is what they recommend for the monthly.
All right, so that's $18,600 a year.
Yep.
And so we're pushing seven out the door before we've collected any on that new market rent. So what is that? 35%, 40% is going out the door to this turn. And so people listening might be thinking, real estate investing sucks. Why would I ever purchase a property that I'm going to collect 18 grand on and have all my expenses and pay $7 in a turn cost? So Tom, why are you doing this?
Wait a minute. Maybe I shouldn't be investing. No, I think about it beyond the like rent that it's collecting. It is appreciating in value. It has a loan on it that's getting paid off. So, that full value at the point at which I want to realize that home, should I want to sell it? Thinking about the yield, which is like the rent relative to all of my expenses, is just one angle of the aspect of the kind of dual play of real estate investing. So, for me, like I don't necessarily need the cash flow in my pocket right now. And if that was the case, I probably would consider, I don't know, moving my money somewhere else possibly, but much more of a longer view investor where if you put together that cash flow yield along with depreciation, along with the loan pay down, like it's just a really exceptional like return and sort of like wealth building, especially with like a couple of these properties humming, along. That it's the real kind of dual nature of the return.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And also to give like some perspective, when was the last time you did a turn of this magnitude on this property?
3 years ago, 4 years ago. I'm not totally sure. It's been, big, good gaps.
It's not every year.
Definitely not. No.
Okay.
I think that's the nature of
All
the
right.
single family versus multifamily or, apartments where you get a little bit of higher turn with these single family homes. The vacancy is a little bit further in between. Probably more expensive turn costs. Like if this home is in a condo or an apartment, maybe I'm paying half of that much. But there's less space. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And then my last question, Tom, before we get out of here, in your pro forma, in your performance projections, when you bought this property, did you have money set aside in theory and then also in practice to tackle these types of turn costs when they did arise? Did you earmark dollars or did you have everything go into one account? Walk us through what that was like.
Yeah. So on, setting up, I try to think about a couple of months rent. So cumulatively within the portfolio, a few months rents for all of the properties, and they can act as like a backstop. So I set up a bank account, set up auto pay, both collecting from the property manager and going out to pay whatever mortgage. And as that money is flowing in, typically I'll just kind of keep it there and separate it from my personal bank account, but making sure that I have a good kind of balance there, maybe a few $1,000, like anywhere, I don't know, 5 to 10,000 bucks, just kind of sitting there for these type of turns. It's not common that turns happen on the same time on properties, but if that was to happen, pull some money in from other places. But it's, again, like not super common that happens. But the worst thing that can happen in real estate is you run out of money and kind of get yourself in trouble that way. So being pretty conservative of having a few months rent on the back end for whatever size your portfolio is.
I think that makes a ton of sense. Although, just slight counterpoint, I would say, is I think that the number that you've got in reserves should be independent of your rent amount. Because if someone owns a house, single family home that rents for $800 a month, if I've got 4 months rent sitting in my bank account, that's $3,200, and I get hit with this turn because it's a similar sized property, I could be up a creek kind of a thing. And so I think that there is mentally, we should be disconnecting the amount that we're having in reserve from the amount that we're collecting in rent.
Yeah. How would you think about the amount to have in reserve?
For me, it's a flat number. Like 5 to 10 grand feels really great on a kind of per property basis. And that's kind of base level for your run of the mill property. If there are properties that have unique functions or features, like there's a property that has a hot tub, that type of property, or that property specifically, it may require a larger turn expense, or there could be more things that go wrong with that property. And so I want to have additional dollars earmarked for that as opposed to one without. And so it's not a one size fits all approach. And so you want to be a little bit strategic around how you allocate funds in reserve based on the property itself. Because I can't tell you how many times I see people talk about like, oh, you just reserve 5% of the income for repair and maintenance and you'll be good. And it's like, yeah, but to replace a water heater on a house that rents for $500 costs the same as it does for a house that rents for $2,000. But the person who reserving 5% on the $500 a month house is totally out of luck. So I think that it's common practice in the industry to think about it that way. But personally, I like to be a little bit more conservative. I'm like you. I prefer to think about it in a flat dollar amount term.
Yeah. And man, there's so many like high interest savings accounts out there right now that are doing like 5% or something. So, I manage all of a bunch of checking accounts through Schwab, and they don't have as great. So like maybe in this particular, real estate checking account, like have like a thinner amount to make sure that I'm covering my, mortgage payments. But the reserves for, these properties, make sense to have them in one of those higher interest savings account, but you still have the same liquidity that you can just slide it over into that account to wire over. So I think there's, a thoughtful way to kind of get the best of all worlds where, you have this automated machine pushing money in, pushing money out for kind of daily mortgage, rent collection. And then you have the bigger reserve pool of reserves in a, kind of strategic spot that's earning like 5%. So it's not just sitting there doing totally nothing, but you still have that same liquidity.
That's exactly
value.
what I do.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I do. Yeah. Yeah. Don't give away my secrets, Tom.
Don't give away my secrets.
Awesome. Well, I think that just about wraps us up. Tom, any final thoughts to share with folks as you're in the midst of this turn?
Yeah. There's so many different components, and I think we can honestly like have another section, going into the marketing and leasing of the property, within a turn. It's one of the most active times, as an investor where you're actually kind of making some decisions. But I guess the kind of theme that I kind of kept speaking to is, within your property manager, like as you kind of develop that trust, but verify also, make them do their homework, show them, answer the why. Yeah.
Trust but verify. No, that's great, man. Great advice. Well, thanks for opening up the vest a little bit on this. Really appreciate it, and hope everyone enjoyed hearing about it. If you're going through a turn, we would love to hear about it. Some of your struggles, some of your wins. Leave us a note in the comments section. We'd love to hear about it. And if you got a question, if you're going through a turn or an upcoming turn, we would also love to hear from you. We can try to answer those in our next episode. So thanks for hanging out with us, everybody. Really appreciate it. And we will see you on the next one. Happy investing.
Happy investing.